Hello and good evening. I'm Melissa Idris.
And I'm Sharad Kutyan.
Welcome to Consider This. This is the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. Last December, Parti Warisan Sabah announced that it was dropping the Sabah from its name and would be going national. Since then, Warisan has been actively recruiting in Peninsular Malaysia. Among those it has recruited so far are former Penang DAP leader Datuk Danilo, former Johor UMNO Assemblyman Suhaimi Saleh, and former MIC Central Committee member S. Sunta. It has also announced a bid to challenge Pakatan Harapan in Penang. But is the party a serious contender in Penang or even the larger peninsula? And what strategies is it formulating to become one? Our guest today is also a member of Warisan, Jeff Ooi, formerly Jelutong Member of Parliament for DAP for 2 terms. He's currently the State Coordinator for Warisan Penang. Jeff, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Hi.
Can we begin our conversation? Can you just explain a little bit why are you in Warisan?
Yeah, I faced the same kind of question when I held the first press conference. Why Warisan? And I answered, why not Warisan? So it's a very obvious choice, isn't it? We have been sitting by, as a bystander for the last 4 years, since 2018. We saw many things that had happened. One parliamentary term, and then you get three prime ministers. So what a bonus that we have had. But are we heading towards the right direction? That is a big question. Is our economy doing well? That's another question. And are we as united as before? Are we as divided and segregated from one another because of our racial differentiation as well as religious inclination? So those are the big words that we kept asking ourselves. And we look around, I think we need to do something. If we were to follow the same formula and expect a different outcome, that would be utterly insane. So somebody said that before. So that is where we were on the lookout. Many choices, in fact, during this season, you have so many political parties, but ultimately we chose Warisan. Now, one obvious choice. Yes, please.
Yeah, so okay, you say it's the obvious choice, but I wanted to have someone get into a much more granular conversation with you about that because of the nature of Warisan. One, a Sabah-based party led by a former UMNO warlord in Sabah, who only very recently, sort of came over onto the Democratic end of the spectrum, and also a party that has not done well electorally. So, they had held power partly after, through defections after 2018, and then lost it when there was a kind of shift in alignments within the assembly. So, it's bled leaders ever since. Why Warisan? Is still an important question, I think, to ask.
Yeah, it's quite kind of funny because everywhere you go, people ask, oh, Warisan, they are virtually unknown as far as West Malaysia is concerned. And more so when they are so distant, such a big distance away from Penang, for example, and you want to set up a base in Penang, and you have no traction for a start. So somehow we have to find a starting point. And the starting point will have to appeal to the local voters. It will have to appeal to the local citizenry, where there might be some discontentment that has been aroused over the last 4 years of political instability, and that we are further undermined by the pandemic and so on. People were looking out for a new direction. Now, I remember, I think one of the easiest for me to make up my mind and made a decision, that is, now, Shafi Abdal, among all, was proposed by DAP and seconded by Amara, I suppose, to be the alternative choice for prime minister alongside Anwar Ibrahim. There must be some wisdom going around the years or between the years of DAP and the Amara leaders. Now, whether they are still holding on fast to that belief that Anwar may have to coexist with Shafi Abdal, or Shafi Abdal taking the helm and then Anwar will be his second man. We do not know. But things fell out. And Amanah, despite their vehement support for Shafi'i Abdal, but I would say that the alliance between Pakatan Harapan and Warisan has ceased to exist since April last year. Something must have been going on, which we are not here to divulge. But basically, we look at Shafi Abdal having been chosen by Pakatan side of a component parties to be identified as the potential prime minister candidate. There must be something right about him. There must be something right about his party's policy, and there must be something right that they have shown, exemplified during the short 28 months or so of governance in Sabah. For example, they have, Sabah has many Christians, for example, and then they have announced the Christmas Eve as a public holiday, for example. So they do it before they talk more about it. It could be the other way around, the kind of political talk that is happening in West Malaysia. So that is one. The second thing is, that's the so-called the last mile, the difficult last mile among the Pakatan component parties in passing through or allowing the UEC to be recognized as a form of educational certificate upon the graduation of certain number of years in the secondary school. That was done hopelessly during the Barisan national years, and it was equally hopeless during the Pakatan's time. But as far as Sabah and Sarawak is concerned, I think Sarawak was the first state or the first wilayah that has recognized UEC. We get it out of our way. We have more important things to deal with. So that is where I do look at Shafi Abdal as somebody who is quite decisive. If Sarawak has done that, recognizing UEC, okay, Sabah follows suit, then let's get it out of our way and focus on newer and bigger things.
Okay. So in its bid to go national, to expand to Peninsular Malaysia, I'm just wondering why Warisan is targeting Penang. What is it about Penang that Warisan sees as its first state to make this foray in Peninsular Malaysia?
Well, I can't speak on behalf of the national headquarters, but when it comes to grand strategy, it's being driven from Kota Kinabalu. That's where the party headquarters is, and we take all our cues from the party headquarters. After all, we are all new members in the party. Oh, let me kill it off. So sorry. So where was I? Okay, we take all our cues as far as the strategic directions concerned from the national headquarters in Kota Kinabalu. And they have been there since 6 years ago. So they have been through the tribulation of upheavals in Sabah as well as the nation, the national arena. So they have gone through all those while we were bystanders because we were not contesting during the 2018 general election. So we were bystanders. We were just like prajurit tua, So we were on the side seat and then we looked around. Now that is where it gives some form of realization. Number one, we take the cue from Warisan because they have figured out a lot of things that had gone wrong during their Pakatan Alliance days, and then they wanted to get out of this doldrum. That's number one. And there are strategic steps. There are also technical options to think of. The second thing is that moving into West Malaysia is not by accident or by chance. It's basically by design. That, in order to save Sabah or in order to reform Sabah, you have to reform Malaysia first. If not, you'll go back to the bad old days where policies were determined but implementation fell apart. So that is where, in order to reform the Sabahans' well-being, one of the key ways is basically do it through reforms, nationwide reforms in Malaysia. So that sort of giving us a golden opportunity to reunite and integrate again what Malaysia is supposed to be. It's not just a Borneo bloc and Malaya, it's more than that.
Yeah, Jeff, a very interesting points you're making. I wonder though, considering how fragmented Malaysian politics seems to be at the present, and I think a lot of analysts suggest that this is going to continue for some time, making alliances is really the way to form government, isn't it? And so if Warisan front line, as it were, in Peninsular, is to attack a Pakatan Harapan state, not a state run by UMNO, not a state run by PAS, but by Pakatan Harapan, isn't it signaling that it has no desire to form an alliance with democratic forces, to the extent that you believe that Pakatan represents the more democratic end of politics in Malaysia? Why attack a Pakatan-led state?
I would not consider that as an attack on the Pakatan states. Number one, if we were to follow the tenets of politics and democracy, when the parliament dissolves or the state assembly dissolves, we go back to 0 point. Everybody will have a stake to claim when it comes to constituencies and so on. I think that's the beautiful part about democracy and parliamentary democracy for one. So I think we are not saying that it is an attack on Pakatan Harapan, but we do see from results of previous statewide elections, as well as the trend line since 2008 and 2013 and through 2018, there are three things that has happened. Number one is that you are seeing that the pendulum has taken its effect. The pendulum of politics and also governance. Barisan Nasional lost very badly in 2008, but that wasn't the worst, and they got worse in 2018. So the trend line, the earthquake, the fault line started 2008. Now, that is the start of the crack lines among the old version of the alliance or coalition type of political parties grouping. And the second thing is that when it came to 2013, the issues being played out like 1MDB and so on, that was the additive or what we call the catalyst that created the sea change 2013. But that wasn't the worst of. When it came to 2018, I was talking about 2013. So when it came to 2018, there was a grand finale for Barisan Nasional and the uprising of Bersatu. And then from then on, you ain't said nothing yet, because that is where an elected government fell apart within 22 months, and 18 months later, the second government fell off, and it was basically a coalition again. And then you come to the current point, you track Malacca. The state election in Malacca, you saw the demise of Pakatan, or you saw the demise of PKR's dominance in any seats at all. They lost completely. It's a complete Waterloo for PKR, and that Waterloo episode got repeated in Sarawak again. I'm not sure whether it's going to get repeated or for a third time in Johor, but I'm very pessimistic in the sense that, number one, now, when you have a grand coalition competing against common enemies and foes like BN or PN in Johor, and yet you cannot put yourself together, and then PKR will contest under its own logo, whereas Pakatan, the two members of the Pakatan, DAP and Amanah, will choose to contest under Harapan. Now, this fissure is something that does not give any assurance to the citizenry or the voters. So I think we have to start worrying for the worst to come rather than things to get better.
Okay, on that note, we're going to take a quick break, Jeff, but let's come back and continue this conversation. So a lot to unpack here. We'll be right back after these messages. Stay tuned. We'll be back in a couple minutes. Thanks so much for staying with us on Consider This. I'm Melissa Idris. With me is Sharad Kutan. Let's continue our conversation with Jeff Ooi. He is the state coordinator for Warisan Penang. Warisan recently announced it was going national, no longer just a Sabah-focused party. It has announced that it will be looking at Penang. So I'm just wondering, when it comes to Penang, Jeff, what is the game plan for Penang? I'm just wondering because there's been some former DAP representatives that are now joining Warisan, but how does Warisan plan to build machinery? How does Warisan plan to build a voter base in Penang?
Yeah. I don't mind sharing some intrinsic information. For example, the discussion with Dato' Shafi Abdal and also his senior leaders did not happen overnight. We were friends. We knew each other. I was in the parliament for 10 years. He was much longer than me. We knew each other. And then with the days of Google, I think he would have Google search on me and my partners as well. So that's where when phone calls came, so we got told of that opportunity and tapping into his mind, what are the type of grand plans that he has, not only for Sabah, the Borneo bloc, as well as for West Malaysia. So that happened. So I think a lot of similar meetings have been taking place throughout West Malaysia. It's just that maybe occasionally some states move faster than the other. So that is where you seem to see that the Penang has so much forward that we might be the call center right now. But I think other states will catch up pretty soon. And I think there's a long line of surprises to be announced soon, from other states as well. Now, in Penang, of course, we have experienced guys, even though we are retired persons, retired from active politics, but we are still watching by the sideline very, very intensively and very, very passionately as well. And that is where we thought that, and I've said that we needed change. We needed a second chance for Malaysia. So that is where
Jeff, can I ask you though this, because as you said, you're retired from politics. Now, how does a party promote itself as a new, young, fresh option if its list of contenders are basically former members of other parties who were once elected members of parliament or state assemblies and now no longer? I mean, it gives the impression that Warisan is just, no disrespect to you, Jeff, but it's just picking up on perhaps known quantities, but not necessarily building a new party in the Peninsula from the ground up with a young voice. I mean, that seems to be the zeitgeist. They're young, fresh, people untainted, people don't have hang-ups, people don't have fights with their, people across the aisle. What is the impression that Warisan is giving when it picks up individuals like this as its first foray into the Peninsula?
No offense, Sharad, but I think this is where you have gone wrong, and most of the public has gone wrong on this count as well, because they saw only all the obvious things and the superficial things on the surface. Now, we went to Sabah, and Sabah is not a strange place for me because during my private career life, I've been going in and out of Sabah for 30 times in the last 30 years. Now, that is a key thing that we saw when we visited Sabah again. We scanned through the membership base database of Warisan. Almost 50% of their membership are those below 40. We have to duplicate and replicate that in West Malaysia, where I think most of the voters are sick and tired of seeing the good old faces again. They are still good old because they turn out to be clowns in the parliament. So because of that, we wanted to follow the same formula. Now, you cannot have a kickstart. If you want to rope in the 40s, those who are under 40s, now they might not be financially sound to themselves into the deepest end of the pool or of the political pool. Now, they need to be financially independent. We don't want to have penyangak to come straight from college and then burst straight into political arena and then you become a career politician. We don't want that. We have seen one too many in Penang. So because of that, our role as retired veterans is to become the key driver. we based on our networking, we based on our context, and we based on how we have assessed and evaluated the quality of leaders, potential leaders, and we talk to them. So that is our role. We are ordinary people. Being a coordinator for Warisan in Penang, it creates no difference from between myself and the rest of the new recruits. Now, my job is just one layer extra. That is to base on my the key contacts together with my counterparts so that we can identify potential ones and then we put them into a pool. Now later on it will be, and there is very strict timeline, because if we assume that after July anything can happen, because with the expiry of the MOU anything could happen before the big floods at the end of the year, then the window is very basically any time between August and October. Now, if that happens, our runway with a big payload like Warisan, so many things to deliver, our runway is rather short. So we really have to speed up the things. So because of that, we have to do it.
I definitely agree. The runway is very short. If you're aiming to be a serious contender in GE15, I'm just wondering, how does the Johor state elections come into play for Warisan? Just how important will the Johor elections be for Warisan in terms of determining its future strategy in going into GE15?
If you were to ask me for my viewpoints, I can't be of any help because I'm more familiar with the grounds and the trend lines in Penang. But if you were to ask about Johor, and then it's going to be a very crowded place. You have old allies breaking off from each other, and then you have unknown new parties clinging on together, and they may elope with someone else who is much longer in the scene. So we do not know what is going to happen. So I think everybody is going to take a break during Chinese New Year, but things will get very, very intense soon after that. Now, what I could see is that Datuk Shafri Abdal is also making all the assessments based on feedback and the ground report and so on, even though we may have some strong fortresses in Johor, but we do not know. We still have to work with like-minded parties like Muda and so on. So these are the national level decision making. So we leave it entirely to the national headquarters and the senior leadership to decide. So I can't be of any help. But I do look into the Johor election, the state election, as if number one is going to test whether Bersatu is going to survive. Number two is I'm going to see whether PAS will still be playing the two-timers game on one side with Muafakat National, and on the other side is to share the same bed with Bersatu. I do not know, but if Chinese sentiments are anything to go by, then with Bersatu teaming up with PAS, who has been displaying the extremist posture when it comes to race, the Uber race, and the religious segregation, I think they will really be thrown under the bus by the Chinese voters. That's number one. So with that, I think Bersatu with the Perikatan National Alliance will suffer the greatest of the casualty.
Well, Jeff, thank you for answering that question anyway, and thank you for speaking with us tonight. Appreciate your time. That was our conversation with Jeff Ooi, State Coordinator for Warisan Penang. And that wraps up this episode of Consider This. I'm Melissa Idris.
And I'm Sharad Kuttan, signing off for the evening.
Thank you so much for watching, and good night.